We made this. Hello and welcome to another edition of Pick a Disc. I am your host Matt Latham, and this is the podcast where someone picks a disc to talk about for whatever reason they want to. And today the guest is my friend Rob Lindsay, who's here to talk about the Green Wing official soundtrack, which sounds interesting when you first hear it, but we have a very kind of interesting conversation that delves into all sorts of things about comedy, music and comedy, soundtracks. I even bring up the biscuit wrap from 2 Points again, because I always seem to do that at the moment. And yeah, so it's all kind of that kind of like interesting conversation that I'm looking forward for you to listen to. But before I let you listen to that interview, just remember that you can follow the podcast on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. If you search for Pick a Disc, it's usually me. If you can see the logo, it's definitely me. There's also a link in the show notes to the Discord server if you want to come on, say hello, all that jazz, etc., etc., etc. So yeah, I can't think of anything else to say, or to promote, or to plug, or to self-promote, or whatever it is I do in this bit. So it's time for me to stop talking and instead talk to Rob. I think it's just past about 4-year mark since I think I first met you, when I kind of hosted off the record meeting that we'll probably talk about a bit more in detail. But it's only taken 4 years for that thing to pay off finally.
and paid off for me as well, because I know you've hosted a number of times and introduced me to some great music. So yeah, it's been paying off for me for some time.
Yeah. So here, Rob Lindsay, friend, fellow music connoisseur, listener, blah blah blah, etc., etc., etc. All the superlatives I can think of. Here to break his pick a disc cherry to talk about an album that you've picked. So, Rob, without beating around the bush, why don't you tell the lovely listeners the disc you've picked for us to talk about today?
Of course, thanks, Matt. I've chosen the original television soundtrack to the Channel 4 sitcom Green Wing, which was composed by a guy called Jonathan Whitehead under the name Trellis.
Yeah, so why have you picked the Green Wing soundtrack?
I've chosen this album because it's been a real kind of go-to for me over a number of years since it was released. I think it was released in about 2007, which is actually slightly later than I thought. I think it's a really, really interesting collection of music. As I say, I've always really, really enjoyed it. And actually, it's increasingly rare for soundtrack albums like this. And I should say it's a score. It's a composed score. So it's not a collection of existing pop songs or previously released music. It's been specially composed for the TV show, and it I think contributes a great deal of character to the TV show. It's a real kind of character in itself in the way that it's used as well. They often do have long stretches with no dialogue where the score is the only music. And yeah, as I say, it's a really interesting collection of music, and it's rare that soundtracks like this get released in this way. It feels like, anyway.
How did you discover Jonathan Whitehead and this album? Was it through the TV series?
I thought it was, but I then discovered he'd been responsible for quite a lot of music for other pieces. So he did a lot of the big fanfare and brass on Brass Eye and the Day to Day, the Chris Morris projects. He also did themes like the theme tune, I think, to Graham Norton's first talk show. He did a lot of music for Smack the Pony and things like that. So lots and lots of those kind of Channel 4 comedy shows from around that time. He was responsible for a lot of the music for them. But this was the first time where I really kind of became aware of him as an artist and kind of noticed the name. And certainly this was, as I say, a kind of rare opportunity to listen to his material in an album.
Okay. So, and what made you what made you kind of decide to get the soundtrack? Was it just like the music on the TV show, or did you?
It was, yeah. It was mainly from the music on the TV show. I'd really enjoyed it. There's a very kind of woozy, dreamlike quality to a lot of it. Again, it's all instrumental. There's the occasional voice used as an instrument, some kind of murmuring in the background and things like that. And I just, picked it up because I enjoyed the show and I enjoyed the vibe and the style of the music. I think what's weird is it's then since become a go-to for me far beyond the TV show. So I probably haven't watched the TV show for, I don't know, maybe 10 years perhaps, I don't know. But the album's something that I go back to repeatedly. It's a real kind of go-to for two things. One, if I'm writing, if I'm doing any kind of work that isn't including sound and I just need to get something done and written, it's propulsive, but at the same time, it has these kind of long, relaxed stretches in it as well. The BPM doesn't get too high. It's really nice to write to and to kind of keep shifting gears, it feels like. The other thing as well is probably in my late 20s, it was a real go-to if I had to make early morning train journeys, particularly if I've been to see pals and maybe was traveling home on a Sunday trade service, and maybe it was a bit cold and it was a bit wet. There's something about this soundtrack that works really, really nicely for just keeping you putting one foot in front of the other, walking through a city you don't know or a town you don't know, or equally standing on quite desolate train platforms. There's a sense again of propulsion and so forth that I really enjoy there as well. So yeah, it sort of became my go-to for two very different sets of circumstances.
So in a sense, it was kind of soundtracking like journeys and travel and like transition, like the transition of movement to different places and stuff. So which, and I mean, for Green Wing, I've only ever watched one episode of Green Wing, and that was the first episode, and I'm pretty sure it was when it debuted. And I don't know why I never carried on with it. I don't think the first episode ever kind of clicked with me. I don't know, but it was always one of those things. Oh yeah, I'll be like, I'll watch it. I'll watch it eventually. And I don't even know. It's probably about 20 years old now, and I'm like, yeah.
It's also, I think it was quite unusual in that it was hour-long episodes, and I know a lot of people who got into it, and then when they had maybe drifted apart from it, the idea of having to come back and there just being that much stuff for each episode felt like too big. In the same way that, we now live in the age of binging, but we will happily binge 8 hours of something. But we wouldn't sign up for that in hour one. It's just something we just find ourselves watching more and more and more of.
Yeah.
But knowing you can kind of step back, I think is quite important.
Yeah, but I mean, and I haven't sat down. I didn't sit down to watch the TV program. I've ended up seeing a couple of clips of the show. I think when you first mentioned you wanted to do this, I saw a few clips of the show and stuff. And one of the things I found quite interesting in terms of deployment of music and the kind of incidental music is that it's the transitions between different scenes. So the way that the transitions work in Green Wing, I think, from what I can remember and what I seen online, is that it will actually physically move the camera and it will traverse the hospital. Because Green Wing, if anyone doesn't know, it's a kind of comedy that's set, like an ensemble comedy set in this like fictional hospital with like all the staff of it, the staff from the administrators to the doctors to the receptionists to the nurses, etc. And I think the scenes transition by actually following the cameras, and they'll go through corridors to other places. So you get like the sense of place, and you get the sense of like the music taking you on a journey to the different scenes, but you'll physically see the movements of where people are spatially in between each other. And that's the impression I got from that. And from my little knowledge of the show, I was getting that kind of mental image whilst listening to this a couple of times. And I find that quite interesting that when you're saying that you found it a good album to listen to while you were traveling, or yourself, or like physically moving yourself from place to place, there's like a weird kind of, not ambient, but I don't know what the word is. And as always, I'm shit at words. There's this kind of sense that it, as you said, kind of propulsion to it, and like propulsion, like it keeps you move, like it helps kind of move the camera, or kind of helps transition you from one place to another through the aim of physical movements. And it's quite rare that I don't know of many other shows that have the transitions quite like Green Wing has. And I just find that quite interesting that you kind of linked it. I don't know whether that was conscious or not, but I just find that quite interesting that you've kind of likened that even more to your personal kind of journeys.
When
in the show it was like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it is a lot of the transitions you get in the TV show, they'll either move physically around the hospital, or you might get scenes in kind of car parks or corridors and things like that that are played out almost like a short Buster Keaton sketch or something like that. One member of the cast, Mark Heap, is a fantastically gifted
Mm-hmm.
clown and circus performer and can do a lot of very impressive kind of physical things. There's one bit where he arrives to work on a bicycle. They just have him cycling back and forward across the car park, and at one point he is just stood up on one leg on the saddle, piloting it around and things like that. He's really, really very good. And again, they use these long stretches where you do just get physical comedy, but with this very kind of fantastic. And again, we've described it as quite propulsive. It's very rarely propulsive past a walking pace. You know, the BPM still isn't very high. And equally, it's then matched with these very dreamlike, wistful, kind of romantic stretches as well, with strings and horns and different percussive instruments as well. There's a really
Yeah.
nice thing that was said about the sitcom. I remember when it first came out, and they said it's about people who, rather than workplace comedies you have where they often find their humor in the fact that people aren't any good at their jobs. In this one, everyone is very, very good at their job. There's the odd exception, but most of them are actually very, very good. They're very competent. They're very capable. They're very able to do their job. And it's almost about the things that they do when they're bored. And often they become their own worst enemies, or they get these little moments of friction because essentially the job isn't particularly challenging. They're all very good at what they're doing. And it's kind of them just winding each other up to stop themselves getting bored during the day. And it's interesting how the score, again, is by, I mean, Jonathan White's a fantastic musician, and it's him just, using these different styles, these different instruments, and sort of mashing them all together in a really, really interesting way, which I think really reflects that nicely.
Yeah, there's I think the kind of mix of different kind of moods and everything, yet still feels kind of cohesive, as if.
Yeah.
So when I was listening to it, it felt like it did feel like a cohesive kind of album of songs, which just happened to kind of be associated with like a visual kind of transition through a TV show and stuff.
Yes.
I want to quickly go back. I just want to quickly go back to that in a second, but I think before we continue, I just want to brief chat about Jonathan Whitehead.
Sure.
So Jonathan Whitehead was an English music composer. He was from Lancashire, and he wrote the music for television comedies, as you said, Day to Day, Brass Eye, Black Books, Green Wing, Campus, and Nathan Barley. Studied at the University of Bristol, moved to London, and he sometimes wrote under the name Trellis.
Yeah.
So he's kind of done all sorts of different things. So he's done things to do with documentaries and drama scores, like The War in Europe and Clifton's Marriage of Power for NBC, Metropolis with James Purefoy, and did 3 series of Medics for Granada, and KML's latest drama series, Strictly Confidential, for ITV. And he's done, and like there's a lot of different stuff that he's done, as you mentioned before. Saturday Night Armistice, Knowing Me, Knowing You, Alan Partridge.
Yes.
Day to Day, Secret Diary of a Call Girl, Moving Wallpaper, which I remember really liking, and then just saw it was in 2008, and I suddenly felt a lot old. Moving Wallpaper. Moving Wallpaper, I think Rob Brydon. Is it Rob Brydon? Yeah, like Rob Brydon, who was like this TV producer who's come to kind of sex up this this like kind of like almost Bally Kiss Angel style.
Yes.
Like soap.
Yes.
And turns it into kind of like a sexy kind of American-led drama with Martin McCutcheon and Jason Donovan, called Echo Beach, named after the song from the 80s. But the thing was that you actually saw Moving Wallpaper. You saw the first bit, and the second half of the hour was an episode of Echo Beach. So you kind of saw
right.
So you can kind of almost see it was. But there's a whole podcast that I could talk about those 2 shows. But the idea, I just thought it was quite interesting. I just saw that and I was like, oh, get flashbacks and stuff. But it was quite prolific, and sadly died in May of 2020, just a couple months into lockdown. And when I was doing a bit of research, I only recently found actually that he actually started a YouTube channel.
He did Trellis Loops.
Yeah, Trellis Loops. Unfortunately, there's only one video on there. And I think
there is actually more. There's actually more, but they're tucked away in the live tab. So because he did them all live, they don't appear under the video tab. But if you click live, there's
okay.
about 24 maybe, something like that.
Oh, okay. I didn't see that. I only saw the intro stuff. So I didn't know there was live stuff. So did you watch any? Did you watch any of them or?
I didn't watch them at the time. I did watch them recently. I know I've said to you that one of my favorite things about this podcast is it's almost like going on Who Do You Think You Are, but with your favorite music. So, people could obviously pick an album. And you'll do the research in the background. And
spoilers for the next 10. Spoilers for about 10 minutes time when I start asking you about your music taste. But carry on.
But there's this. I know you do that research, and I'd sort of been looking into it, and I did find it was only when we started chatting about this podcast and me presenting this album that I did go and have a look, and I found that YouTube channel and did watch through those videos. It's really interesting because he's got a series of it's the same setup as in the introductory video that you saw. So he's there clearly in a music room with different instruments around him. He's got a looping setup and an iPad and the materials there, and he's just laying stuff down over the top of each other. Very similar to what he does with the Green Wing soundtrack. Actually, it's very much that kind of approach of lots and lots of different sounds and different instruments being assembled in almost like almost like a sort of hip hop production way. Like it is loops and layers being built over the top of each other, which is really nice. And again, very in keeping with the Green Wing soundtrack.
Yeah, so I didn't go that much into it. But I think one of the first comments was saying that it was quite sad that I think after about a couple of months after he started doing the lives that he sadly passed away and couldn't continue.
Yeah.
So I mean, if we go back to, so I think this was 2004 that this came out, that Green Wing came out, and I think the soundtrack then came out, I think, after the show. Yeah, so this came out in September of 2007. The last episode of Green Wing was in January of the same year. So it took a while for the soundtrack to come in. So
I think it's interesting. I think that the soundtrack, I think, is a combination of music from both series. They obviously edited it down quite a lot in order to fit it on the CD. So I think you probably do get, again, a composed score like this might be stretched or it might be compressed as befits the scene. I think you do get that benefit on this album with the fact that it's the ideas across 2 seasons all kind of compiled together as well. Some of it is stings and stabs and setups and things like that, and some of it is kind of longer tracks. But it's definitely from both. I think I've got the CD and there's an advert in it for the sort of special edition of the DVD that came out, and I think this was probably produced around the same sort of time. Yeah.
Okay. So going back to, I think when you first listened to the music and you thought, there's the soundtrack, I need to get that. Was it due to the soundtrack being the kind of music that you was into, or was you kind of into the kind of like breezy kind of instrumental stuff to begin with? Was this like a left turn for you at all, or?
Not really. So I've always been super into sampling. I don't really play any instruments myself. I can kind of pick things out on piano and things like that, but I've never really played any instruments myself, so I've always been super, super interested in sampling. So
because I think background, I think because again, going back to the off record, one of the most recent ones at the time recording was you hosting and talking about the Go Team.
Yes,
and we've recently saw them live and stuff, and the Go Team being very kind of sample based.
Yes,
so,
yes.
Yeah, I think after that, when I started listening to this, I was like, okay, I'm sensing a common theme. Theme, particularly with the Go Team and stuff. So it's that kind of, again, I think the term that I saw online to talk about the Go Team is like plunderphonics, which I think is a nicer name to sampling.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a fantastic. And again, things like avalanches are a good example of that. Beastie Boys, Paul's Boutique, a lot of this kind of DJ Shadow, stuff like that, kind of piecing things together from different sounds. And although this isn't really leaning into sampling, it seems to be much more made from noises and instruments that Jonathan Whitehead's played himself. I think there's one credit in the liner notes on the CD that thanks someone for being able to use their voice or a little bit of their voice on something. There was one moment as well I noticed when it was on Spotify about 2 years ago. One track very briefly was grayed out. Sometimes if you've got you get this with soundtrack CDs that are made up of songs from different sources. Sometimes they've secured permission to stream half of them, but not all of them, because they're all different licensing deals. And one of the Green Week tracks was grayed out for a short period as well. So I wonder if there was maybe a licensing issue around a sample or a voice or something in that. But the rest of it's always been there. And again, I think that is because Jonathan White's played all those instruments, made all those noises himself. But it still feels very pieced together from different ideas and different noises, and in some instances quite short sounds as well, which I think is really interesting. There's a really nice call and response to a lot of the instrumentation here. There's an awful lot of tracks where you'll have it might start off with one particular instrument that just fades or go into reverb, and another one picks up the same motif, or another one answers those back and forth. Do you know what do you know what I'm describing? So that kind of idea where one instrument is met or answered by another one, and that carries on all the way through, which I'm a very big fan. I really enjoy. Yeah.
Okay, so it's kind of like interesting kind of experimentation with kind of like sound to something you're sort of like drawn to as well. So what kind of so what kind of stuff were you kind of into when you was younger then that got you into kind of this music? Do you remember when you got into that kind of sample?
I do. I think it was so we're probably talking late 90s, and it was probably with albums that, there was lots and lots of hip hop around at the time, had been throughout the 90s, where people were taking samples from old soul records and old funk records and looping them and things like that. And then it was hearing that get more complex with things like DJ Shadow introducing. I remember the Beastie Boys' Hello Nasty album coming out that had, again, that really nice combination of samples and then live instrumentation over the top. So some of that was loops that they'd sampled, some of it was loops they created themselves. And again, that started getting really interesting to me. Finding the original songs that had been sampled as well became a bit of a kind of scavenger hunt. And again, this was pre-Shazam and pre-Who Sampled. And I mean, let's be honest, it was pre the internet that we know it now. It was very, very early days of that. Lots and lots of stuff was coming out on CD. There was a compilation album called Sampled that they did about 4 or 5 versions of, which was where a lot of people would find draw attention to the Labby Sifra song that Eminem sampled on My Name Is. It drew attention to lots and lots of that late 90s house and dance music that would have old kind of soul and disco samples in it as well. All of that sort of stuff seemed really, really rich and really, really exciting. So a lot of that was going on at the time. And that's what I was getting hugely, hugely into. And again, there were lots and lots of labels putting that material out. There was lots of kind of rare groove, crate digging stuff coming out from labels like Soul Jazz. Is it BGP, I think is the name? There's a couple of really, really nice labels that did fantastic, fantastic compilations of those old records. Blue Note were obviously putting out lots and lots of compilations around that time of their jazz back catalogue that had been sampled by different people as well. So it was a really interesting. I got hugely into that. It was a really interesting time to be getting into that music and seeing how you were sort of seeing the collages, but also seeing the original ingredients that went into those as well. So yeah, I got hugely into it, and it really seemed to then be being picked up by a lot of the indie scene as well. Again, there was things like the Verve track bits Symphony. Lots and lots of people were starting to play with big samples and yeah. So yeah, hugely interesting.
Oh yeah, exactly. I don't know the original, but it's that like violin sting.
Yes.
I'm not sure where that. I can't remember where that's from. I don't know where that. Do you know where that's from?
I do. So it's a Rolling Stones record. Although more accurately, it's a record of Rolling Stones covers that I think their manager put together, and the Verve sampled it, and they had permission to use, I think, 6 seconds, and ended up using 8. And because of that, this manager was able to go in and say, I want all the rights to that. You've breached contract. And he took all the rights. I think he recently passed away a couple of years ago, and his children said, no, these rights should go back to Richard Ashcroft and the Verve for putting that song together. So the rights are back with them now. But there was a lot of back and forward.
Oh yeah, that rings a bell now, because I'm pretty sure that all the 100% of the profits ended up going back. Like the Verve didn't get any money from that. Yeah.
They didn't get a single penny. So I think they've got it now. It's gone back to them now.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I wasn't really. This is all kind of like news to me. I wasn't aware of all this kind of stuff. So you had there's kind of like a scene, kind of like a movement of people grabbing like compilations of samples and stuff then? Because I'm pretty sure the I can't remember what they called, the "My Name Is Eminem"
Yes.
sample. I'm pretty sure that's like 3 seconds. It only appears once in that song, I think.
It's a wild track. So it's
Yeah.
called "I Got the ... and it's by Labby Sifra. I think I'm getting that right. Yes, and it's the sort of second half of that song. So you get the first half of it's very, very different, and then it almost kind of fades out and stops, like a kind of false ending, and then comes back with that groove first with the bass line and then the guitar over the top of it.
Mm.
And there's a bit right at the end as well. You get about 25, 35 seconds right at the end where it all goes double time and a string section comes in, almost to then just come in and fade out again. It's really weird. And do you know the performer? There's a bit of trivia around the performer. So either the bass or the guitar lick on that bit of the track that got sampled by Eminem is by one of Chaz and Dave. I can't remember if it's Chaz or if it's Dave, but it's them playing, I think, the bass line, because they were incredibly sought after and talented session musicians at the time. And so one of them was in the studio when Labby Sifra recorded that song and did the bass line.
That rings a bell, because I'm pretty sure I had someone say that one of Chaz and Dave is on an Eminem album.
Yeah.
And then, or it's something, that sounds like something that will start a TikTok where it goes, "Did you know Chaz and Dave was on an Eminem album?"
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
like immediately starts off on TikTok and he goes, yeah, like the second to try and stop you swiping upwards.
Yeah.
Chaz and Dave on an Eminem album. Yeah.
So
But yeah, it's kind of, then again, get there. That's kind of weird, kind of like collections of different things or ideas that kind of get manipulated and moved and interpreted into stuff. And I think that goes into kind of the Green Wing soundtrack album, because there's and again, I think using the kind of, like, again, it's not as sample heavy as perhaps the Go Team, but I've seen there's not many things online that I could find on this. I think there's only one kind of like 100-word little tiny article that I found.
I saw it, which I think which felt like it was from a longer listicle, didn't it? It's so short, it feels like it's like his 100 British soundtracks or something. You know, it's such a small article, it feels like it was part of a longer piece.
I think Audio Oxide, or whatever it's called, Audio Oxide or whatever. Yeah, by someone called Andrew Bridge, who it's like about 2 paragraphs. And the bit that kind of clicked with me was that fans of the show will definitely find some nostalgia here, and those that enjoy Lemon Jelly or Mr. Scruff should find plenty to enjoy as well.
Yeah,
and Lost Horizons by Lemon Jelly was actually an album that we covered on the podcast.
I listened. Yeah, I saw. Yeah.
And all those years ago, and I can't remember. It was like episode 11, and considering this is going to be episode 114, it's been a while. I can't, the only song I can remember from that is the Duck song.
Yes.
Yeah. But seeing that, but there is kind of like a weird. I can kind of see the similarities with that. So because I was thinking, I goes, oh, this is kind of something different. I don't think we've covered anything like this on the podcast before. And I saw that, I'm like, oh yeah, it does feel a bit kind of like Lemon Jelly.
Is, yeah. It's a really interesting one. There's a very old Reddit notice board about Green Wing where someone's tried to do a sort of Green Wing soundtrack inspired mixtape, and this is probably 5%. I think I'll be honest with you, I don't think that's a Reddit board that has a lot of activity at the moment. But someone's tried to do a mix, and again, it's lots of kind of filtered strings and bass lines and things like that. There's some nice stuff on it. I mean, it's a nice listen, but yeah, there is something that is incredibly unique about this set of music. And again, I mean, you know, you've mentioned there artists like Lemon Jelly. There's in the CD, there's thanks to Lemon Jelly, there's thanks to Brand Van 3000, there's thanks to Bonobo. There's a few artists like that named in there as well. So I think maybe there was a scene or something that he was part of. Certainly was making music around the same time as those artists as well. And I think that does come across. I think what's weird though is if you listen to his other stuff, obviously the stuff that he did for Graham Norton's very different from this. The stuff that he particularly did for Brass Eye, that was trying to do that big bombastic news coverage parody of those, was very different. A lot of the people behind Green Wing, in terms of the writers and the behind the scenes producers and creators, did a program then that came out after this. I think they only did one series of, which was called Campus, which was the same sort of idea but set in a university. There's a fake university, Kirkut, I think, and it had people like Catherine Ryan was in that, Sarah Pascoe was in that. There were lots and lots of names that you'd recognise. the guy from one of the cast from Bridgerton, Jonathan Bailey, I think that's his name. He's in it as well. So there were lots and lots of people there. And I remember that program coming out and being super, super excited just because I thought, Trellis is doing the score for this. Let's see what this is like. And again, there was a slight gear shift in that he was doing stuff that was much more guitar driven, still had that kind of, that sort of percussive propulsion to it. But it was just different. And it didn't quite have the aesthetic, the kind of string led romantic wooziness that this has got, which I think is such a lovely aesthetic.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, because I think this is like I've brought it up to recent episodes. It's only something I've started doing properly after 110 episodes, where I've only realised that I could have actually the album playing very, very quietly whilst I'm talking. I've not started that bit yet,
Yes.
but I've got Spotify on one of my other monitors, and interestingly, Green Wing seems to be the only soundtrack of his that's on Spotify.
Yes. Yes.
And there's 2 EPs, but I don't know if they're him or not, where it's just people, where it's someone with the same name there.
I don't think it is. I had a look at them. I will say he was involved in lots of, at one point he played keyboards in an Irish punk band. He did some different things. He was part of some different outfits. Again, as just someone who I think really enjoys making music and is incredibly talented. I think he was involved in lots and lots of projects, but there's nothing that's quite the same as this.
Yeah, I did a quick search for Jonathan Whitehead as well, and seems to be one song on a Sky theme tunes.
Really?
On a Sky theme tunes called "Don't Sit in the Front Row," which again I don't know. I think it's like, this is an album which has like Sky, Takeshi Castle, John Bishop Only Joking, Sky League of Their Own, Sky Brick Cops, things like that. Sky News 2010, Sky Sports News 2013. So it's just, but they're all kind of, it's a like a compilation album, and he's only got one song in this. But there's not really that much from him as well. So it seems to be, I think, interesting that like one of the only few things that seems to be on like streaming services is this soundtrack.
Yes,
and
yes.
I did try and look onto YouTube to see if there's anything else, and there's not. It's just the Green Wing soundtrack that doesn't seem to be anything else. I can't find anything else.
It's really interesting because I think he's done theme tunes. That's the thing. He's done theme tunes. He's done scores. He's done compositions, and those are still. It is very, very rare for them to be commercially released in this way. I think it's also increasingly rare for us to ever, unless someone's done a theme tune that is played with nothing over the top, it's just played as is. Most kind of score stuff, you'll only get it with people talking over the top of it. You'll only get it with bits cutting into the start and end of it. It's quite rare that the audio exists in a way that can be released on a CD or can be put on YouTube. As I say, the closest would be the opening theme tune to something, but again, that's traditionally going to be a sort of 40-second edit. You're not going to get a lot of it. So it's a weird one. I think it does still happen quite a lot because I listened to, what did I watch? There's a documentary called Next Goal Wins, which is about the American Samoan football team and their attempt to, I think they're on paper the worst football team in the world. They consistently come last in every qualifying game. They've had some mortifying defeats, all this sort of stuff. And the documentary follows they advertise for a new manager and say, look, we don't want to be the worst in the world anymore. Who will come and help? And they made this fantastic documentary about it a number of years ago. I think it's being adapted into a film. I think Taika Waititi's adapting it maybe, but I would really encourage you to check out the original documentary. There's a really fantastic use of music throughout that. And there's a couple of pieces. There's a piece called something like Welcome to Cambodia or something. I can't remember exactly what it's called. But it was a great piece of music. And I think I was able to find it by Shazamming it, but then cannot find that piece of music anywhere. It's not on Spotify. It's not on, I couldn't find it on YouTube. There was one reference to there maybe having been a vinyl release of the whole soundtrack, but that seems to have disappeared as well. It's absolutely baffling. And I think you do still get these pieces of music that don't ever get a commercial release as a piece of music. They're only ever used in a film or a larger piece of media. They do kind of get lost. They don't get released in that way. So yeah, I think they're still, unfortunately, they are still the kind of the last piece of music that's still disappearing.
Yeah, it's a bit of a shame. So I was kind of interested to see what kind of different styles are. I think I ended up just like briefly playing an episode of Secret Diary of a Call Girl, just listen to the introduction music just to see what it's
Yes.
kind of like and stuff. And it's a bit different to this, but I think it's kind of like as a composer, I'm like you probably have to kind of shift through different genres and everything. But that's an interesting kind of point you brought up about kind of like the like particularly in like the age of digital media now, where like people like either expect things to be on there, but then and people are, and like perhaps with streaming media, not streaming media or kind of Spotify,
Yes.
saying like, oh, it's not helping artists and everything. But then when you've got, and there's a whole other conversation about the amount of stuff that's on there. But then if you've got things like Trellis or Jonathan Whitehead's other stuff that's not the Green Wing soundtrack, just seemingly lost in the ether.
Yes.
I feel like there's an opportunity just to have it as like an archive, like the Internet Archive is trying to do and stuff, and even that's under threat at the moment as well. Because you've got all this information, you've got what's called abandonware as well. I think pretty much one of the other podcasts I do, which is a point and click adventure game one. I was put something on that Twitter account asking if there are ways so I can play the Discworld games.
Yes.
Because they're not available anywhere on like to buy properly. So I need to see if I've still got the CD to play. But the concept's there where like you've got media, you've got music, you've got creative stuff that's there, but then it's not available for people to enjoy because there's going to be at least one person who goes, oh, I like to try and see if I can listen to that a bit more, but there's no way for me to properly listen to it, and it usually ends up being me on YouTube finding a really it's a me on YouTube watching a 144p version of the Biscuit Rap from 2 Pints because I love that song.
Yes,
because it's not anywhere else. Then they've never released the musical version of that.
It's weird, isn't it? There's a song on the series 1 of Flight of the Conchords. I think it's series 1, where they do a song called Pencils in the Wind. And I love it. It's a great song. I know this stuff's fantastic. It's a really, really great song. And it's not on any of the albums. And I think the only place I ever saw it, someone just had sort of burnt a compilation CD and they said, oh, it's just on a torrent of old radio shows or something like that. And it's so strange to me that this really fantastic song just hasn't had any kind of commercial inclusion on anything at all. And again, not on Spotify. It's really odd. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say, there's a really nice, if people are at all interested in kind of scores and music and things like that, there's a fantastic YouTube documentary that someone made last year where they tried to track down the author of a little 4-note audio sting that got used on the Disney Channel, I think in the early noughties. And it really kind of shows you how convoluted some of these things are, because it may just be an audio designer who's been asked by a producer to compose some short pieces of music or to make different things for different idents. The arrangements might change, authorship might change, ownership might pass from organization to organization. Again, it might be that Disney didn't make them themselves. They had third-party producers make, all this sort of stuff. It's really, really interesting because the person doing it's about an hour long and it's well worth your time. He really goes on this big exploration to try and find out who wrote this piece, where did it come from, and he just keeps hitting dead end after dead end after dead end. And he said it's so strange that there's just absolutely no attribution for the author of this sting that was a huge part of the kind of identity of a channel as big as whatever it was, Disney Club Kids or something like that. I can't remember. But yeah, it's really worth checking out.
Yeah, I think it's just quite interesting, particularly you'll try and find something, and then you're there on ages from Google trying to find if anything's on there, and it's like you start to doubt whether you just made up something. Like,
yes.
Yeah, the amount of times I really wish that I could just go, what's the song that went that I heard about 30 years ago when I was 7 that's never left my head.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone's listening to this, there's a song, there's like a house song or something that I heard years, this is like decades ago, right, and it's never left my head. It's like, with the chorus, it goes, ain't gonna go, and I've never been able to find it, and I'm starting to believe that I made it up.
Oh, really?
It's that kind of thing.
Do you know, I had a friend once who said she had a really weird dream the night before. She'd gone to a Killers gig, but the Killers didn't play any of the songs she knew, they just said, we're just going to play our new album. Now, the Killers didn't have a new album coming out, so we've deduced that her subconscious must have written 11 new Killers songs that she didn't previously know, and then the band performed them for her in her dream, which was quite a wild piece of mental gymnastics. But yeah.
So someone somewhere has an unreleased, unrecorded, unwritten.
Yeah, somewhere in their brain.
Album.
Somewhere in their brain.
Yeah, but no,
it's crazy.
But it's a fascinating concept, I think.
Yeah. I wanted to go back to something you said before as well. So, I've said a couple of times, I've listened to other stuff that John Whitehead's done. I mentioned the campus soundtrack, for example, which, and again, nothing else did get released. I think it's quite interesting as well that, particularly if someone is doing scores for TV, you sort of have to keep evolving and doing different things, partially for your own mental health. You don't want to sort of be stuck in a rut.
Yes.
And also to try and give different shows different identities as well. It's interesting as well. I don't want to sound like I'm disappointed in the other things that Jonathan Whitehead wrote. I'm incredibly grateful that this exists as a CD and did get released in this way. I'm sure as well that a lot of my appreciation for this album is the fact that it does exist in this format. It probably, if it wasn't released on CD, probably would have just I probably wouldn't have listened to anything like this much. It wouldn't have the place in my habitual. It wouldn't be on rotation in the way that it is at the moment. So, I get that. And again, at the same time, I've had artists who I've absolutely loved material by, and then they've released a new album and gone in a different direction, and it's not quite done it for me, and I've been a bit disappointed. But they've sort of got to be allowed to do that. So, that was all I wanted to add, really. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. So like in a world where they never released the Green Wing soundtrack, and I think the only reason they may have done that is because, there's jumping the gun a bit in terms of the reception of the album.
Yes.
So I think it's relevant. Because I think it won an award, I think the RTS Craft and Design Award for Best Original Score in 2005, and was BAFTA nominated.
Yes.
Now I'm thinking that's probably had a bit of a sway into releasing it as an album. I think so. I think because I think the music for Green Wing got its own kind of focus and part of the identity. And I mean, again, I say I'm only going through the odd couple of YouTube videos, and my memory of the first episode that I saw nearly 20 years ago. I think it was like one of the key kind of focal points. I think that's probably one of the key reasons that it came out. And I'm going to assume that the other stuff that he's worked on probably wasn't able to be either put into an album format, or perhaps wouldn't have been as popular enough to.
I think the other thing I mentioned before, these were hour-long episodes. They did 2 series. Traditionally, British sitcoms, there's not a volume of material. They often are 6 episodes, 2 series, and a Christmas special. There isn't necessarily that much material to fill out a CD if you were going to listen to something else. It's interesting as well that the use of music in this, as I said, and as you said, those transitions were very active parts of the program. The use of music was very, very present. When I was chatting to you, I was saying, I think it's quite rare. We spoke about this, I think, last time we met up. I think it's quite rare that a sitcom, that the music forms this much of its identity.
Yeah.
You'll often get TV shows where they build a set piece around a particular song. So in Friends, Marcel the monkey wants to listen to Lion Sleeps Tonight, and they build something around that.
Mm-hmm.
Or there might be bits in a program like Spaced where they riff on the Matrix and play the Propellerheads music underneath it, or something like that. It's rare that you'll just get something that is a sort of character all the way through. And you pointed out some interesting examples. They are there. I just hadn't thought of them because they're so brief. And it's things like that slap bass that plays on Seinfeld.
Yes.
Between, you'll get scene changes or cuts to a different day. You get an exterior shot. And again, Friends had that similar sort of thing with the kind of little guitar stings that they do in between scenes with the outside of Central Perk or the outside of the tower block. It's when the music is part of the identity in that way, it tends to be much, much briefer. It tends to be these little stings rather than something that you could say, we're going to release this on an album with tracks between a minute and 6 minutes long.
Yeah, I think there's that. I think there's that as well. But I think they got some where they'll have music as part of its identity as well. So I'm thinking of Goodness Gracious Me always had a spoof
Yes.
song. They always had a musical number in them. Yeah, and yeah, like I can't. The only one I can think of is the one that's spoof of Men in Black or Blacked Up Men, with us talking about minstrels.
Yes.
Where it's
Yes.
talking about like the white actors in the music halls, kind of playing black characters and stuff, and just commenting on that.
Yes.
I remember actually, I don't think I've got it now. I do actually remember having a CD of Phoenix Nights.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And again, the only ones I can remember is a song called Black Bin Bags, which is also to the tune
It's
of
also a
Forget
Men
Me
in
Not.
Black.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 I think I'm sensing a theme here.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, also the Forget Me Not song as well. No.
Yes. Yes.
But yeah, but I think, but like that, a lot of that was quite a lot, because I think some of the comedy like spoof, comedy kind of like spoof
Yes.
shows. Like I think Tim Healy was Tim Healy like played a kind of racist folk singer,
Yes.
like a racist folk singer. Which, but then the audio is kept into the on the actual CD. So
Right.
like, so you got like Peter Kay going to the guys, like, see, old-fashioned classical stuff, classical kind of British music. He goes, yeah, but it's a bit racist, isn't it? He goes, what? No, it's
And then
get them
suddenly
off, get them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it basically feels like it feels like it's ripped directly from the DVD
Yes.
or the audio track, rather than actually taking the song out and being recorded for. Yeah, and there's been quite a few things like that. I
Matt
think
the Pony's another example.
Yeah.
That's again, Jonathan Whitehead worked on that as well. So again, they did spoof songs at the end. They do spoof indie music videos
Yeah.
and things like that quite regularly as well.
I think if anyone ever wants to release the musical Christmas special of 2 pints of lager and a packet of crisps prequel onto vinyl or CD or something, I would love to have that, because that biscuit wrap is one of my favourite things in British comedy. Ralph Little's, not a day goes by when I'm going, I want the hunky junky biscuits. Yeah. But again, yeah, that the only reason that seems to I can listen to that is clips off YouTube rather than
Yes.
as like, and they're quite low quality. They're like about 14 years old now and stuff. And
Yes.
but yeah, on the flip side as well, there's kind of like shows that kind of do other kind of things and interesting things in music. For example, I think South Park movie, or even South Park TV show.
Yes.
South Park. I remember having the Chef Aid album, which was on one episode, where it seemed like
Yes.
a bunch of songs kind of collected together in a cash grab. But like one of the episodes had the kids in South Park try and raise money for Chef, and having all these musicians play themselves and doing this like festival. But then all the songs are on this. Appeared on this. It's about 20 tracks long and stuff.
I remember that soundtrack album. There's one great gag on the album in that the album's got Moose T versus Hot and Juicy's
Yes.
I'm Horny on
Yeah.
it. And it's not in the TV show. It's not in the episode. It's on the soundtrack. And the track is introduced by a answer phone message from the producer of the album. Having an argument with
Trey
Matt
Park.
Park, with Matt and Trey about him going, look, I really think we should talk again about including this horny song on the album. And them going, we don't want that song. That song's terrible. We don't want it. And he's like, no, look, it's going to sell so many more copies of the album. We've got to do it. And he's like, look, let me just play it to you now. And that's the context with which that song appears. It's that. And it's them going, turn this off. We don't want to listen to it. And him going, no, go on, this is great. And it's him singing along and whooping it. And that, I think, there's such a great kind of meta joke in that about, that idea of really cynically planted singles and songs appearing on soundtracks that don't have anything to do with that piece of music. So I really enjoyed that. I thought that's great.
Yeah, I enjoy that. And last one I need to mention, and someday I want this to be a Matt Pick episode at one point, like shows like Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, where it's built around, where the shows are built in comical kind of spoofs of music. I don't know if you ever watched. Have you ever watched Crazy Ex-Girlfriend?
I didn't. I saw you tweeting about it the other day. I haven't. Is it like a Flight of the Conchords thing? Is it like that kind of idea? Kind of.
It's pretty much like a comedy drama. There's a lot of kind of almost meta, almost for like kind of winks to the camera and stuff. But then, so it's kind of like this kind of weird kind of comedy drama about a woman who gets obsessed with an ex-boyfriend and moves across the country to kind of
Yes.
try and seduce him and stuff. And it's so the main character's not particularly likable at first, but then occasionally then like they'll have one or two songs during each episode, and it's kind of spoof comedy songs because Rachel Bloom like pretty much had to start doing comedy songs on YouTube and stuff. If anyone wants to laugh, just Google "fuck me Ray Bradbury." It's hilarious.
Right.
Yeah.
Is that safe to Google?
It is. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot. I mean, there's no nudity in it, that's what you're saying, but the language is a bit explicit in places, but it's absolutely hilarious. But it's that kind of thing put on for CW, so it's all kind of like safe for network TV.
Yes,
but then on her personal YouTube channel, she's uploaded every single song. But there's been alternative takes where there's all the kind of more explicit or swearing into it.
Okay.
So there's like one song called "I'm a Good Person," which you got the network friendly US network friendly version, right, which is kind of nice and stuff. But then you got the YouTube version, which is like almost almost filthy and stuff. And but that kind of comedy, that kind of musical comedy aspect of things is kind of built into the DNA of that. And
nice.
I so want to cover it as a Matt pick one day. I love that show, and it's the amount of times I've procrastinated from editing, or I've started editing and then suddenly I've spent an hour just watching songs from that show again. But those soundtracks are all on streaming and so hopefully forever. So they've been kind of immortalized, like live shows and stuff. So so you've got that kind of like identity of music linked into the kind of comedy aspect of things and stuff, and slightly different to what this album is, but it's always interesting about how music and comedy kind of have worked quite well together.
Yeah. I think what's really notable with this is it is a score. There aren't vocals. This isn't a soundtrack that has jokes in it, and they're not pieces of music around which a set piece can be built. It's much more like the way in which the slap bass in Seinfeld is used. You know, it's part of its identity. It's a continuous thread throughout it. Again, it's all largely instrumental. It is that nice dream-like wooziness that I absolutely adore. There's a real variety of instruments as well. It'll really kind of play around with different noises, different sounds. Again, you might get something that's a very kind of dubby reggae bass line or something like that, or you might suddenly get something that's much more kind of again, very kind of Motown brass for a moment or something like that. Again, lots and lots of small little licks. So you'll get little bits where an instrument might just do 4 notes and then hand over to another one for 4 notes and another one for 4 notes. There are a few noises that come and go. So there's a ascending boom, boom, boom that gets used on a couple of different tracks in different ways as well.
Yeah.
It's great. It's got such a dreamlike quality to a lot of it. I should also say as well, I mean, I used to listen to it a lot when I was doing train journeys where maybe I was a bit cold and a bit tired. It may also be that I was slightly hungover as well. And there is something that is very reassuring about this album, I think. Again, the transitions even between individual tracks are very gently done, very nicely done. It's really kind of articulated really well as it's how it's sequenced as an album. And I really like that side of it. So yeah, it's become a very reassuring album for me. If I have needed to get from one place to another, it's very useful for that.
Yeah, so let's talk about a couple of select tracks if you want. So anything that you want to like highlight specifically?
I suppose what's really interesting to me is, apart from the first track and the last track, which the first track is the theme tune, it's a very kind of bouncy, upbeat piece. Again, it's only about 40 seconds long, I think, something like that. And then the very last one, Logos, is just a little kind of ident that they used to use for going in and out of the commercial breaks. Apart from that, this is one of those albums, and I think you do get this a lot with instrumentals or sample-based stuff, where because there aren't any kind of obvious singles on it, because lots of the tracks have got pauses in them or little moments of almost like points that you could do an edit if you wanted to as well. There are kind of gaps between tracks as well as gaps during tracks, as well as in between tracks as well. So it was interesting listening back to this because there were bits that I thought were one track that are in fact 3, or equally there were bits that I thought were more than one that's all the same track as well. But yeah, I mean, I think it starts off very nicely. I really like Car Park, which is track 2. That's a really nice one. There's a little stretch there of about 4 or 5 tracks that I really, really enjoy. One that people pull out is track 7, No Tune, which has got, I think that's the sort of harmonica driven one, I think. Just hastily just checking in the sleeve notes.
Mm-hmm.
But, there's some really nice stuff in there. The other one I would always say is there's 2 of them, Fiber Troll and Fiber Optic, that play around with similar themes and again have got an incredibly sort of dreamy quality to them, and again a very woozy romantic feel to them. So they're 2 that I go to quite a lot. It is an album that I can kind of just jump in at any point and just let it play on from there, like it's an old, like when you find a film on playing on TV that you really enjoy and you're just like, well, this is what I'm going to do for the next 45 minutes, even if it's halfway through. It's that sort of vibe for me. So yeah, I really like it.
Yeah, I think saying like there's 23 tracks on this album.
Yes.
But then it's only like 45. Well, it's 45 minutes long.
Yeah.
But then like you've got songs that vary from like 33 seconds all the way up to 6 minutes and 21. But then again, that 6 minutes one is that fiber optic. But there's but the next second longest is only about 3.5 minutes. So it's all bouncing various. So you can kind of see that it's kind of like meant to score, and it's not full, like quote unquote full songs. For lack of a better word for it. But I think it kind of means it kind of dips in between different ideas and different motifs and stuff throughout, kind of building up to that fiber optic actually. As a kind of like the finale of it.
Yes.
But yeah, I think there's like a mixture of kind of things that flick through.
Were there any that, because again, this is the thing, I did start going, I was having a little listen through before and thinking, are there any that really kind of stand out? And actually, I'll be honest with you, most of them do. There's a couple of little stretches around the middle where they feel like they're slightly more stings. And there's a couple towards the end, Dark Kingston and None Hope, that do get a little bit darker maybe. But again, apart from probably the theme tune and the end sting, which are the 2 that I do tend to start on track 2 just because that opening theme tune is, it's a sitcom theme tune really. So it tends to be the one that you hear the most and certainly that you're familiar with the most. And it's possibly the one that, if there is any imbalance there, that's the equivalent of this is the one that was released as a single. So you stop hearing it as part of the album.
But I say, I mean, there's a period in again just after the half point where it feel again. I don't know which music's been used for the end credits, whether it's the theme tune again. I'm not sure, but there's quite because I was listening to and I was trying to figure out if any of which songs were potential end credits. Sound stuff, and there's quite a few. I think Kingston sounds like it could be. No Hope, I think, as well. Mainly because it was the last one on the album.
Yes.
But yeah, so they're kind of. Don't know whether the fact that I know it's a soundtrack kind of goes against it. I think when I'm having that kind of predetermined thing. One thing in my notes for this, and I'm aware that I think we kind of just quickly breeze through the kind of like the track listing bit we usually do on these episodes. But I think because of the nature of the album, it's kind of hard to kind of single them out.
Yes.
But I'm quite enjoying this kind of like general kind of discussion about them as a whole. But there was Mark Adams, who is one of the co-hosts, well, or quote unquote one of my bosses on the Red Dwarf podcast I do. He will be on a future episode. I've got in a couple of days' time. I'm recording a new episode with him. He was my guest for the Prodigy episode.
Nice.
And he did another podcast called Right in the Childhood, where he's talking to so he's like in his early to mid 40s, like introducing his like Gen Z friend, who's about like 24, 25, to shows he used to love as a kid. And he's then watching ones that his co-hosted. And one of the things that they did was introduce a piece of anonymous music to try and get their impression of.
Yes.
And what he also did is that he gave me he gave me MP3s of an album to myself and friend Colin, who's been on this podcast about 6-7 times, and asked us to listen to it with no context whatsoever of what it is, and to give us views on what it was. And it was kind of like an industrial kind of sci-fi type thing, which I thought was a video game score at some point. And I was like, and I was getting all these images like a Japanese video, no, I did say Japanese, like a video game or something. And what it was actually like the score sound, like a soundtrack / score for a Japanese anime he used to watch 2 decades ago. But I would really be interested in perhaps giving someone who's probably got no context whatsoever on this album, making them listen to it.
Yes.
And getting their opinion on it and thinking,
yes,
what do you think this is? What do you think this is? Where do you think it's from? Or at least, I just want your thoughts on what about the album, and see if they pick up on whether it's a score or whether it's just an instrumental, or whether it's just because I think part of me was kind of not warped, not biased. Kind of the context for what it was already given to me by the name of the album.
Yeah. So it's sort of prescribing the context in which you listen to it, maybe.
Yeah. So I would. Okay. So it's one of those things. I would be very interested to see what people would take of it if they listen to it with blind. Give them like unlabeled MP3s, because I'd be very interested to see what they make of it in that way.
It's really weird you say that, actually, because this is an album that, to me, it is the Green Wing soundtrack, but I've listened to this album so much more than I've watched the TV show. And I think I did last time I watched it, because the use of music on the TV show is obviously to fit a purpose. And so let's take Fibre Optic, for example, which you've said is over 6 minutes long. It obviously doesn't appear as a 6-minute long version on there. It's almost like a series of stings and variations that have been assembled into this track, but are probably used individually throughout the program. Equally, there are going to be pieces of material that are on here that have had sections looped to extend them or to make them better fit a scene or pacing or something like that. And so I think last time I watched it, I actually found it actively distracting, because I was going, oh, they've changed that bit, or oh, that. Do you know what I mean? Like, I was sort of listening to music and noticing these differences. Like if you hear like a 12-inch mix of something, and maybe a chorus doesn't come in when you're expecting it, or a bridge is extended. If it's something you're familiar with, you really notice that stuff. Like, you really notice it. And I think I do remember watching it, and it's become such a suite of music for me now, rather than a kind of response to the sitcom anymore. In the same way that when you get those, like, I don't know, a John Williams Jurassic Park suite, that has been made to be performed and played as one piece of music, even though it may be made of elements that are peppered throughout the film when you watch the film. So it sort of becomes its own thing. And I think this set of music has become that for me. It's something that I just enjoy listening to, and at the same time, it's a real go-to for me if I need to get from place to place or mentally get something done. It is one of my kind of go-tos as a thing in itself.
Yeah, I think like a kind of example of that, like only a year after this finished, after Green Wing finished, In-Betweeners came out, and the In-Betweeners, really liked them. I think I didn't pay much attention to the music at first, apart from the fact that I recognised Kate Nash's Foundations in the first episode, and then when I started rewatching, like years later, I watched the first episode again and completely forgotten. Well, didn't realise that like all the music in the first episode of that was like some of my favourite bands. So Wombats is in there, Tellison, who I've constantly talked about on this podcast, was on there as well, doing Wasp Nest. Again, Foundations, but again, they just got. It seems like they've got the musical bed, or the stems, and like assembled them, and then like so they'll just carry on this long instrumental thing that throughout, and then suddenly they throw in the chorus at a random place.
Yes.
Yeah, without the build-up stuff and.
Yeah, or in TV commercials, you sometimes get, if a piece of music's being used in a TV advert, they might chop it up, or do you know what I mean? Or they bring the chorus in an extra, sometimes even like a kind of a bar earlier or something, so all of a sudden you're only getting three of the previous bars before the chorus comes in. And you really notice that, like how that's being used and how that's been chopped up as well.
Or to carry on with the theme tune aspect,
Yes.
again, the TV shows that use actual songs.
Yes.
Actual songs. Now, I don't know, you probably can't see behind me, but I don't know if you can see.
I can't. So, what have you got? I can see X-Files, I think.
I've got, speaking slightly later so the microphone picks me up, I've got all 3 seasons of WB sci-fi teen drama, and I will fight for bat for this TV show, Roswell.
Nice.
The theme music to that, and this theme music to that is "Here with Me" by Dido.
Yes.
And I remember when, and I'm pretty sure this was like a couple of years before it even came released as a single and put on her album.
Yes.
And when that single came out, it threw me because the first chorus is about twice as long as the first chorus of this, and it's like, I am what I am, and then kicks right into the chorus. And whenever that song, whenever I listen to that album or listen to that song, it's like, it just feels so short because I'm so used to listening to it on this flipping title sequence.
I tell you, so there's some wild examples of that where you think something's been made for the TV show and it hasn't. And there's things like the theme tune from Cheers, the Where Everybody Knows Your Name song. And there's a longer version of that where it starts detailing all the things that have gone wrong in your life that particular day or that particular week. You know, it paints this really sort of bleak picture of misery of this person saying, you know, all this has happened and, you know, your wife's left you and your dog's dead and things like that. You know, you need to go somewhere where everyone knows, you know. But it's so funny. You just get all these like extra lines. There's a brilliant one as well. If you, there's a longer version of the theme tune from The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air.
Yes.
Which obviously was written for The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. It's incredibly specific to that show. But there's another version of it where there's at least one more verse of that as well.
Yeah.
Detailing other stuff.
I think that's either in the pilot or in like the first couple of episodes, because it's the one where like moving in your auntie going to Bel-Air, and then it usually cuts to him going into the taxi, but then there's a goes, I begged and pleaded and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And I'm like, wait, what? I remember seeing that for the first time because like on BBC Two the one time, like, wait a second, what's this? What is this?
Yeah. Why is it still going? Why is it doing this?
But and there's probably all. Yeah, and like the Friends theme. The only reason I think of the Friends theme tune is that because I just before we start, I was eating my dinner and I just started the Bake Off special with David Schwimmer. So I've got the Friends theme tune in my head a bit. So the Friends theme tune again, kind of like I think it's a bit of a cheat because I think the actual song kind of lends to a very easy edit.
Yes.
After the end of the chorus.
Yes.
After the end of the chorus, but the "I'll Be There For You" kind of chorus, it kind of ends with the kind of like quick fade out, and I'm pretty sure in the original song that kind of fades out, but there's an extra thing in, so it's probably the music editor is probably the most easiest job he's ever done. And we got it's funny because that was one that did get released that went to number 1, I think, maybe, you know, that and obviously off the back of the TV show and things like that. So there's a few like that where again you hear things used in different ways and they kind of take on a life of their own in different places. So it's really interesting. Yeah, I think it's fascinating, kind of like idea and concept and stuff of just manipulating music for TV shows and stuff.
Yes,
but
my favourite one I will say is they're always worth tracking down because quite often they really struggle if something's had a commercial release on CD or vinyl. They really struggle to come up with the B-side. Like, so occasionally you'll just get another piece of music, or you'll get something. So there was an example. I think you've covered the Foo Fighters recently, and I remember that they released a song that was from the soundtrack from the X-Files movie called, I think, Walking After You. Mm-hmm. And the B-side of that is just Mark Snow's X-Files theme. Clearly, they were saying, well, what else can we put on this CD? So I like it for that. I enjoy it.
Yeah. Actually, and like kids TV shows, I think also have kind of that kind of thing as well. For some reason, I ended up going on a Neil Innes kick. Is it Neil Innes or Ines or? Like
from the Bonzo Dog Dino Band and Monty Python Club.
Yeah. I think it was. I think he died recently, like a couple of years ago. A few years ago, I think, and I think I ended on that. And I was quite surprised at how many kind of kids programs he did.
Yes.
And I was quite surprised that one of the ones that he did was the Raggy Dolls theme tune.
I didn't know he did that.
Yeah, he did the Raggy Dolls theme tune, and there's a full 3.5 minute version of that I was like, and I discovered that, and I'm like, oh my god, and I'm like, I can finally figure out how the introduction and the last bit kind of merges together, and as much as I love Mr. Brightside, it kind of feels like a cheat because it just repeats.
Yes,
it kind of repeats the same verses again in a slightly, but with a key change.
Yes.
Key change, and I'm like, oh, I was so disappointed. It's like the long-awaited third verse for the Raggy Dogs, the Raggy Dogs
exactly.
tune. Yeah,
and some hitherto unknown dark origin story for the Raggy Dolls or something like that. Yeah, that's amazing.
But
that's amazing.
But yeah, all that kind of stuff's what like there's like, but I think there's actually again, all to kind of like going from that, I think there's actual full, perhaps somewhat similar to how this works. Actually, the original like Ron Waterman or Wasserman, who composed. It's either Waterman or Wasserman. I'm gonna
okay.
Let me just double check. I'll get
Ron R-O-N.
Yeah, Wasserman. That's it. Ron Wasserman, also known as Aaron Walters and the Mighty Roar, is an American musician who composed the original theme song for the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers.
Oh, nice!
But I think there was actually a full-on discography. I think Power Rangers Redux, where he actually did a full, like it's nearly 90 minutes long, where it's like full versions of the instrumentals, or the songs with that as well. So you got the ones with so you got the full kind of rock, like almost 80s arena rock kind of things. You then also have like a whole section like for like the last half an hour of the album is just the songs just with their instrumentals.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I just come up to my head because I think it's something similar to that as well, because I think they released that because of the success of the show and stuff.
Yes. It's weird as well because you do get a lot of those kind of, and again, I think this we've noticed shifts in this. A lot of those cartoons were obviously toy commercials. You know, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles cartoon existed because they wanted to introduce kids to a bunch of new characters and a mythology and a world building. You know, that was this big thing. You sell toys by the world building and the kind of lore and stuff like that. And so quite often you did have theme tunes and music either on quite a sort of factory production line thing, or it often was writers and marketing people coming up with theme tunes. So I think things like the theme tune to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, I think that was written by Chuck Lorre, who's a sitcom writer. He did Big Bang Theory and Two and a Half Men.
That blew my mind.
Yeah. And again, it's the teams that they had at those times who were taking those jobs and were part of those part of those teams putting those things together. I thought it was really interesting.
Yeah. So I think the same mind combined, the same mind created that iconic 80s, late 80s theme tune, which subsequent Turtles cartoons kind of took the motif of. I mean, very recently, actually, I finally watched the 2012 version of the Turtles. It's on Paramount Plus,
right? And
like I was like 4 years old again, like enjoying what is probably the best version of the franchise, to be honest. And but it's still taking that motif. Rise of the next cartoon, which I think is Rise of, or their theme tune is like kind of takes it, but it's like Rise of so that kind of almost like that kind of motif of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles theme that everyone knows, that's been used in at least 3 of the 4 TV series.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing how much is that word kind of like samples its own kind of legacy, more or less. So it's kind of been a kind of like interesting roundabout way of talking about the tracks on this album.
Yes.
But I think
I do want to give it its due. You know, it is a fantastic album. There's some fantastic stuff going on in there. I really, really recommend that. It's a joy. That it's really weird. I looked at some of the other stuff that exists. It feels wild to me that this is the only piece of John Wyatt's music that I could find presented in this way. And yet you can very easily find the Who Wants to Be a Millionaire album, something like that, which I suspect is a much more intense train journey. If you remember that one.
Is there a version where you can buy it with coughing?
Exactly.
Where you got the Charles Ingram version where you're going
yeah. I do know there's a wild bit of trivia. Again, apologies, I'm doing lots of tangents here. There's a wild bit of trivia about the Who Wants to Be a Millionaire composer. There's a guy called Michael or Matthew Strachan, and he used the obviously it was an incredibly successful piece of music. There's some interesting stuff going on there. So as you go through the questions, the music shifts up half a tone to sort of subconsciously build tension as you go along and all this sort of thing. So there's a lot of things going on there, but it's a very simple, effective piece of music. And he apparently then used all of the proceeds, and continues to use the proceeds from his royalties for that theme tune, and has been sold throughout the world and all this sort of thing. And he used the money to fund the recording of a series of like pastiche 1970s porn movie soundtracks. And there's an old photo of his dad from the 1960s is on the front of all of these. I can't remember what the pseudonym is, but it's all kind of like wah wah guitar and funky bass lines and things like that. And he's just done all these, and there's about 6 of them maybe. Like he just keeps doing albums of parody porno music, and that's what he's used his Who Wants to Be a Millionaire success in order to be able to do. So fair enough.
If there's one thing I'm going to take away from this episode, it's but then again, though, I think what's interesting again, and I think it kind of links in. I think it kind of links in with kind of the theme of this album and the chat that we're having, is that when you're talking about the Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, the music, the way that music is done, to kind of hark back to what we was talking about at the start, with the way he's describing it, and the fact that they kind of shift the key like half a step up each time.
Yes.
To build that tension. Again, it's the transition, it's the journey of the guest to get to £1 million. They're using the music to kind of guide and bed in a journey to that. Again, in the same way that I think the Green Wing is using the music to kind of guide the viewer through this hospital to the next physical part of that, to kind of create a sense of space, to kind of create a sense of journey. Because again, for Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, I'm not going to go through the premise. Everyone should know what the premise is by now. You are basically ascending.
Can I interrupt you there? I love the way that you haven't felt the need to explain what raggy dolls are, or like the biscuit wrap from 2 pints of lager. And so I think if people are still with us, we don't need to explain what Who Wants to Be a Millionaire is.
Yes, but please listen to the biscuit wrap. It is one of my all-time favourite things to come out of British comedy. But with Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, they are ascending up a ladder. They're pretty much getting higher and higher along with the music and stuff, and it creates again tension. It beds in, and it kind of helps create a kind of sense of identity with the world, because that music in Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. And again, I've never realised until you told me they actually released that music. But again, there's probably some people that will find that music. It's same with the Great British Bake Off. The Great British Bake Off music is on Spotify, so you can so you can go and listen to that while you're baking, and then feeling really, really pressured, I think.
Yes.
At the place I work, there was a kind of a bunch of fellow staff were doing a bake off Christmas, like a Christmas bake off type thing, and I was filming that, and I was taking photos, but also really annoying them because I started playing that music from the bake off on my phone. To which one of them went, please do not do that.
Yes.
This is very stressful.
It's wild, I do think, like, again, with kind of streaming and Spotify and things like that, I just think it's so much more likely that this music is getting out there. I think that probably the fact that the Green Wing soundtrack is so unique in terms of Jonathan White's output and the access that we've got to it, I think it's probably just from the time at which this was all being recorded, and I think it's a real shame, because he's fantastically gifted. I would say, those YouTube videos that he's got in the live tab, there's some really interesting things where he is just playing loops of, and some of it is, for example, loops of government statements about COVID, during those 2 months between lockdown and when he passed away. And he's doing things with little bits of vocals there, introducing different instruments, bringing drums in and out and stuff. It's really interesting. And again, I'm incredibly appreciative of when artists do things like that, when they show their process, when they do that sort of stuff. I absolutely love it. There's a bit as well where he's still clearly playing around with different styles, and a lot of it is with fewer instruments. It's rare that he does tend to go to the same kind of sounds that he brings in, but you do still get that fusion in there as well, which I think is really, really interesting.
Yeah,
there's a lovely quote from his autobiography I wanted to mention, which was from
Mm-hmm.
Victoria Pyle, who made Napoleon, Green Wing, and things like that. And she said, he gave us an almighty fusion of styles, jazz, classical, electronica. You say to him, we need something thrashy but lyrical, Radiohead but uplifting, gravelly but sort of pink in the middle. And then 24 hours later, that's exactly what he'd give you. I just think it's great. Yeah.
Oh wow, that's really kind of like was that an obituary or?
That's it. So his obituary is written by Chris Morris, and it's incredibly warm. They're incredibly warm, incredibly detailed. There's lots and lots of stories, lots and lots of information about him in there and about his process and the different work that he did as well. It's a really gorgeously written obituary. So yeah. I really encourage you to check that out. It's great.
Yeah. So yeah, I think more or less time to start kind of like wrapping up towards the end of our chat. So
Of course.
I think again, the usual closing arrangements question. Well, the sequence in my kind of notes I've always called the closing arrangement sections. A few of them are kind of I don't think can actually quite apply. But I think I usually ask if you've seen the band live, but the only closest thing is probably the recordings of the live thing. So yeah, so you never really
it would be that really. It would be those videos on his YouTube channel. I think they do. He's on there as Trellis Loops, and I think it links out to it from the obituary, which I think was written for the Guardian. They're really interesting to see because it isn't just him performing live; it's him composing live and assembling live, putting tracks together and playing with different noises over the top. Which again, I know is technology. Lots and lots of people do experiment with and do play with. So. But it's really worth seeing. Yeah, I mean that was a real treat.
Yeah, and again, the question is about other albums to go on the discography. But as we said, there's not really much on the internet about what to go on to next, which is a bit of a shame, I think.
There's not. I know, and it's really interesting to see the kind of volume of stuff that he did. He did do the soundtrack to, I think it's called This. Is it called This Day Shall Come? There was a Chris Morris film. The Day Shall Come, that came out in 2019. He did the score to that. That might be out there. I know film soundtracks are sometimes a little easier to find, but yeah, still there's not that much stuff out there, which is a shame. Which is a real shame. But I mean, as I said, the one thing I would say is, I only realised afterwards how many things he'd done and how many of the big noises. Things like the day-to-day score is probably the one that I knew the most. That big big brassy sound, and again brass eye and things like that, which I think he was involved with, which again was very much a part of the identity and the personality of that program as well.
Yeah. So we're now reaching the very important question, the most important question of the podcast, which is the question of the song with the Spotify Hall of Fame playlist. Now, for anyone who's not listened to the podcast before, what this is, I'm going to ask Rob to pick one song to be immortalised forever in the Spotify Hall of Fame playlist. Yes. I can't veto that choice. So, Rob, which song are you going to pick to go onto the playlist?
I'm afraid I'm going to choose the longest one. I'm going to choose. I think I'm going to choose the longest one. So I am going to choose Fiber Optic, I think, because it's the one that I go to over and over and over again. I think it's a really beautiful piece of music. It's really romantic. It does some odd things along the way. I think it really nicely demonstrates that mix of long dreamy sequences and then shorter stings and snaps and things like that. So unfortunately, Fiber Optic is always the one that I'll go back to. I've put it on mixtapes before and things like that. It is a lovely one. So I'm going to go with Fiber Optic, please. Sorry about.
No worries. So Fiber Optic joins the Spotify Hall of Fame playlist, which it follows Lie, Cheat and Steal from the Run the Jewels 2.
Oh, nice.
Which is going to be an interesting transition to go between them. And and before that is Paint a Vulgar Picture from the Smiths.
Very nice.
So we've gone from the Smiths, Run the Jewels, to song from the Green Wing soundtrack. So
yeah, there you go. But it's again a kind of like a sort of mournful romantic piece as well. So yeah, hopefully that'll be okay.
Yeah. So yeah, Rob, we've reached the end of our chat. So before we go, people want to find you online. Where can they find you?
I'm in most places as Rob in the Office, all one word. So yeah, I'm on I think most things under that name.
Yeah, and I think we should take this opportunity as well. So, because I know you through the off the record, like monthly meetings, run by our friend Matt. Like you've deputised on Terror Cage. I think the first one I did, you was in charge, and
Oh, right.
somehow,
Okay.
yeah, the first one I did, yeah, the first one I went because I hosted the first one I went to,
Of
and that was
course you did.
and
Yeah,
he's
of
the first one
course
that
you
was
did.
there. So
Yeah.
yeah, so if you want a brief chat on what to expect on that, or?
Of course, yeah. So Off the Record's a live meetup that we do in Birmingham in the UK at the start of each month. You can find us online. We're on Twitter and Facebook and various other different places. And it's hopefully, if you like this podcast, then you'll like Off the Record. We essentially get together. There's a little introduction, say hi to each other, and then we listen to an album and then have a chat about it afterwards. Each time there's also a theme, so a reason why someone's chosen the album, and at the end, if people have individual tracks that fit the theme, it's great to share those and discover new music in that way as well. So yeah, that's us.
Yeah, so it's really I've really enjoyed it. It pretty much gets you to listen to things that I probably would never have listened to, like
Yes.
for example Zarika by Flaming Lips
Yes.
which is like 4 albums played at once, which was a very interesting experience.
Yes.
And yeah.
Yeah, that was so Matt, who puts it on, I think found that to be, I think that profoundly tested his patience, because we all had to have a different music player and you have to sync it up between every track as well.
Yeah.
It's like a 1, 2, 3, 4. So I think he found that a little bit stressful, but yeah, it is a lovely way of finding new music. And I think you introduced us to T-Girl Scientist Monthly as well, which was fantastic.
Yes, it was the album Hypertrophy, which I spoke to Matt from the band all the way back in episode 50. So when they came on, and so and also gave us a bunch of vinyl to give out to people as well. So
that was great. I've got my copy downstairs. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, so that is it. That is it, Rob. I want to say thank you ever so much for coming onto the podcast, and so.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it. I would encourage everyone to check out the Green Wing soundtrack. It's a weird one. It's often in my like Spotify Wrapped as well. There'll be like individual tracks from the Green Wing soundtrack. And I think Jonathan Whitehead was my most played artist, I think, one year. I think it was just from playing this over and over again. So I would encourage everyone to check that out. And also do look for the Biscuit Rap if you can find that somewhere as well.
Yes. Listen to the Biscuit Rap. But again, thank you ever so much for coming on, Rob.
Thank you very much.
You've been listening to Pick a Disc, and I've been your host, Matthew Latham. Our theme music is Pump by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com. Pick a Disc is hosted by the We Made This podcast network, and you can find them on www.spreaker.com/user/We Made This. You can find the Pick a Disc show site on www.spreaker.com/show/pickadisc. You can find us on all the usual social media type places like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter under Pick a Disc. You can also email us on pickadisc@gmail.com. Until next time, happy listening to all those discs that you are picking. Goodbye.
If I asked you to think about Japanese movies, what do you picture? Anime, no doubt. You think of the beautifully rendered works of Studio Ghibli. Maybe you picture Godzilla and his coterie of city-ravaging kaiju. Perhaps you see Toshido Mifune wandering the countryside and armed with only his wit and his blade. And I know you're trying not to think about the pale-faced ghost with long hair and creepy noises. And maybe you're a fan of the exploitation type of cinema, where schoolgirls wield chainsaws and machine guns with abandon. My name's Perry Constantine. I'm an author and a teacher, and back when I was in college, I had the exact same image of Japanese films as you did. It was my love and interest in these movies that led me to move to Japan. Now, almost 20 years later, I'm still here, and teaching classes about Japanese film. What I've learned in that time is that Japanese movies are so much more diverse than just anime or kaiju or samurai. Sure, those movies are fun, but by exploring the wide range of Japanese cinema, there's so much we can learn about Japanese history, society, and culture. That's why I started Japan on Film. In each episode, I'm joined by a different guest to help me spotlight just some of these excellent movies. We'll be watching the good, the bad, the popular, and the bizarre. Come along with us on a journey into the wide, wonderful, and sometimes very weird world of Japanese cinema. Listen to the Japan on Film podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and visit our website, japanonfilm.com.